Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Path Builder podcast series, where we speak to professionals and entrepreneurs in the development sector, or path breakers, as we like to call them, and learn a bit about their experiences and perspectives of the work that they do. My name is Rachna, and I'm from the Path Builder team, and your host for this podcast as well. In today's episode, we have Chandrakant, CK, or as he's commonly known, and is also the co-founder of Path Builder. And he's someone who's been working in the development sector for over 10 years now. Hi, CK. It's great to finally have this conversation with you.
Hi, Rachna. Indeed, looking forward to our chat today and sharing some insights into the last 10 years and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure this is going to be pretty interesting. And if you've been listening to our series, we're going to be doing this a little bit differently. In this conversation, we're going to focus more in learning about CK's experiences, right from his academics to interest in sustainability, to him also trying to build a venture in the education space, and then to being an impact investor for a decade. CK and I were just chatting a little bit before we started recording this podcast. And CK, I'd love to kind of start with a question on how did you go from being a student of physics to getting interested in sustainability and then education? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey there?
So I was studying physics at a university that was, I would say, maybe liberal arts. It had you could study engineering, you could study business, you could study social sciences. What that meant is the campus brought together students from different interests and backgrounds and potentially career paths. And that was my first exposure to things beyond the sciences, because I got the opportunity to sort of study, interact with people with a very diverse set of and a very eclectic group of young minds that were, very intelligent, very keenly interested in doing what they were looking at doing. So that was the first step maybe into saying, okay, there's the world beyond physics, theoretical experimental physics, I would say. So that was the first step. And then, as I think many of our listeners would probably know, student groups and student interest groups that happen across different campuses is how I got exposed to more and more newer things, including sustainability. And primarily at that point, it was more around waste and waste management, and looking at how waste was getting looked at. And I think the people are the key influencers behind my path, I would say. The people that I've come across that I've found interesting, that I've been able to learn from and absorb, that have shaped my path, I would say. There would be former bosses who happen to be friends now, or friends who became partners in the work that I've done, sort of were heavy influences in cultivating my interest in the very overly and maybe slightly vague term of sustainability, because it's quite broad. Yeah, I hope that answers the initial thought process. Rachna?
Yeah, that is really interesting, and I'm also curious to then know. So you did this fellowship as well, which kind of exposed you to the kind of research that you were interested in doing. And then you also went on to study social entrepreneurship, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there? Because from what I understand, that's what led you to impact investing, where you spent a whole decade.
Yeah. So I think um, so sustainability, the initial parts of the lens was also very much very technical, looking at waste, looking at water, looking at the technical innovations that were happening, and that was my initial, and then slowly dipping into more the activism of getting more people to get involved in maybe living a much more sustainable life or leading. And the fellowship was sort of a leadership fellowship that one of the research centers in my university um, that was there that I had the privilege of being part of, which sort of exposed me to a whole world that I had initially at that point not been exposed to, which was the not-for-profit world, the human side of impact, understanding what different not-for-profits were working on, from youth-related, education-related, waste-related problems and challenges that, and this was in Egypt, and getting exposed to how they were struggling either on functioning or as um, uh, trying to create an impact. And it sort of shed gave me more insights in a part of, like, there's the two halves. There's the half of the technology, the solutions, which are maybe slightly brick and mortar, and then the other thing is you have to get the people that are probably facing those challenges to get them to adopt or include them in the adoption. And that's another thing um, um, I got exposed to, that this was at the time when I think maybe aid was slowly shifting from aid to what now I think more and more people talk about philanthropic investment and impact investment, and what these organizations were struggling to become sustainable, but also how do you make the beneficiaries part of the solution and not a recipient of a solution, right? And that was the human side that I got exposed to. And um, and that's how I heard about this social entrepreneurship MBA that was inspired by Professor Yunus. And I said, oh, that might be one of the areas that I want to learn more about. And that's another thing that maybe it's a very cliche statement, but that has been the key driver of my own path building, which is learning, and wanting to learn, uh, and then then learn the next thing, and then learn the next thing. And that's how I got into the social entrepreneurship MBA program, which again was um, a very interesting exercise because we got exposed to a lot of social businesses around the world. The university, the college was also learning and trying to figure out, because it's the first iteration of the program, and getting exposed to other impact professionals and individuals that were wanting to learn, were doing different things within the impact landscape, or trying to get into the impact landscape, um, was a big influencing factor. So I guess in our chat earlier, Rachana, I was telling you, I think learning was the first one. I think the key thing in the path building exercise for myself was relationships and the kind of people that I have at not just key junctures, but on your day to day, having a chat that, in their small bits inspire. And I think the group that was part of my grad school were a very happy accident, because we didn't know each other before we all convened in London. But then we were so diverse, and yet there was this like, oh, it was like we understand each other. It was like we were the same motivational factors. So that was very, very enriching. So learning and relationships have been key pillars. And then the third one, maybe the listeners would attest to this, is avoiding boredom. And as far as I can remember in my life, that's always been like the biggest motivation. Is like, how do I not get bored? And so much so that I don't remember who taught me that word. Like, it somehow is like, oh, I'm getting bored. And then technology like, then do something about it. So it's always like, do something to avoid boredom. And learning now in the later part of my life, I guess, has been a big thing. And that's how in the grad school program, getting exposed to these social businesses, and trying to problem solve was a big factor in trying to say, okay, it's because no two problems are alike, and you have to deduce, and that's maybe the what do you call, the bedrock and the basis of physics, is trying to understand the world. That is sort of, at least my take. Maybe people, if there are physicists, if I misspoke, I apologize. But like, it is a way to understand the world. And I think that's what I've been trying to do, but in a different, and physics says, the scientific method, and so physics is more maybe understanding the natural world, and then impact in work, social impact work, or impact work is trying to understand and get the human side of the world to work more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I kind of think
And
that it kind of sounds like while there could be different uh, areas of work, I like how you sort of try to put it together in your journey of
yeah,
either understanding the world or uh, looking at the world as it is and seeing maybe what aspects of it can change or improve. So that's
yeah,
very interesting. And Sika, you talked about a lot of things, and I think a few things that I want to highlight is you talked about how, uh, before you did your master's program, you kind of got the perspective of understanding the human side of things, and then you also
mm-hmm.
talked about constantly looking for opportunities and avenues to learn. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
both of these things are extremely important if you're working in the development sector, because if you're not open to this, or if you're not understanding the human perspective, it's even more challenging in a challenging space to actually navigate your way, right? Because without this, it's kind of hard to understand what's actually happening and what needs to actually shift. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I also liked what you said about people being your key influencers, and also um, finding spaces where you aligned with people. That's something that really resonated with me, because I think a lot of times the work we do, we're able to do it because we can do it collectively with a bunch of people. It's not something that we can do by ourselves. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that I think just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight because I found really
definitely.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think, sorry, if I may add there a couple of 2 points. One, the people thing, completely agree. It got reinforced in the way most of the work happened during the grad school program, because we were exposed almost on a daily basis to challenges and to social businesses around the world, from energy to waste to education to a different bunch of things. But the way we tackle them were in groups of people. So they were, if I can, it's been a long time ago, but I barely remember being on individual problem solving tasks. It was pretty much all our assignments, or like a major chunk of our assignments, were group assignments, which meant you, and most of the time we were able to shuffle around the group. So you got exposed to different personalities and dealing. So I think I really like the way you put it. I think people and the influence they can have. The second thing, something that what you said sort of popped into my head. Um, I hope I've tried to do this. Um, um, I think the word is humility, and uh, I would aspire. I don't know if I've been done it well enough, but I think um, you would know, you've been in the impact space. It is not the like it's not very flashy, right? It is, it is very hard work, and it is not always the exciting. Maybe when we speak it sounds a lot more glamorous than it actually is. And when you are looking at solving challenges, I think um, humility goes a long way in how you let others influence you, but also um, understanding that uh, um, I think we don't want to impose solutions, we want to build them. I think, yeah, sorry, that's just 2 additional points.
yeah, and I think humility, I kind of feel like it also ties back into, I mean, you talked about learning, but it also that can happen only if there is a willingness to learn. And I
Mhm.
think humility is a big part of that.
Yeah.
Um, and and now I think I'd love to kind of speak a little bit about uh, the work you've done post your master's program, which is basically as an impact investor with Ennovent. And you've been there for a decade. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about the work Ennovent does? And the big question for me here is, what made you stick around for a decade?
Okay, so I one thing I maybe I've worked with impact investors. I don't know if I would classify myself as an impact investor, but the the 3 or 4 things that I think I have mentioned earlier, which is learning, people, um, um, I think are 2 key drivers why I've been working with Ennovent over the last over 9 years. And Innovent has evolved in what it does over those 9 years. And so what Innovent does is support impact businesses around South Asia and around the world, to help them grow, access new markets, And the way we support these early stage impact organizations or impact businesses is provide like either working with impact investors to figure out who to invest in, to work with maybe work with corporates and figure out how they could function better within their value chain with other impact related organizations and build those partnerships, and or work with philanthropy and grant givers to again impact organizations and figure out how that can be catalyzed. So that's sort of the broader functioning of the work that Ennovent does. And what that allowed me to do when I joined, and this goes into the third thing I said about avoiding boredom, is I had just moved back to India and I didn't know how the landscape was here and who was who. But the work allowed me to listen to impact professionals or primarily social entrepreneurs that were coming up with indigenous, innovative solutions to challenges that either they themselves were facing or they were motivated enough to solve within geography. And it was not just isolated to India. And which meant that I was speaking, I had this sort of, I could listen to, it was like sitting and talking and listening to stories of these people um, talk about their journey, and maybe at times be a sounding board, mostly just listening to what they were saying. And that's what I did. So that's, I guess that's a different way of looking at what maybe the brick and mortar of the work was, which was maybe evaluating if they were ready for a investment, or helping them prepare for a grant award or an investment, and review. But what it allowed me to do is listen to, and so every entrepreneur has their own journey, and the really good ones are really good storytellers, and the other ones are also, I would say, most of these people that are motivated are very good storytellers. And it was almost like a storyteller listening to these people, and that sort of got me to hear them, learn about the kinds of challenges they were facing, the way they thought about solving those challenges. I think that was a big driver. And then at key junctures when maybe I thought maybe there were other, Ennovent offered me those learning opportunities within the organization to allow me to grow, um, and take up new challenges, and then helping manage the fund, which had allowed me to get mentored by some amazing impact investors and learn and get sort of inadvertently get mentored, and learn there. Or over the last 4 years that I've been helping manage the India BU, is moving the BU into sustainability, building long-term partnerships. What I said, relationships, partnerships have been, people have been key drivers, and then listening the earlier part allowed me to then go, oh, you know what, I could maybe potentially connect there. So the 4 odd years of helping lead the BU has probably been one of the most challenging, which also meant there were so many learning opportunities. And yeah, retrospectively, I think I'm able to speak like this. Maybe going through it, I don't know if it was a constant, oh yeah, I'm getting excited, this is very challenging, why did that happen? But then it was a lot of maybe ranting and whining, but then retrospectively they were probably learning opportunities. I'm hoping the lessons stick around, and then I'm able to use them in the rest of my path building exercise. But yeah, the theme of people and the kinds of people that I got to work with within Ennovent and allied with Ennovent was also probably why I have spent so much time within the company as well.
I think that,
Yeah.
that's super interesting, and I like how you kind of brought back the points about you constantly had learning and opportunities and different types of growth opportunities. Um it's not. I mean, in at least today's world, I mean, we tend to kind of switch to different roles, and that's totally fine. But the fact that you got opportunities within the same organization is definitely interesting. A quick question. So if you were to do this again, would you have still spent on the last decade the same way, or would you do it differently?
If if I knew all the information that I know now, then obviously I would have probably done it differently.
Got it.
But knowing what I knew at the point of my decisions, I would think that that is the path I've taken. I There are certain decisions, yes, I would have probably would have taken differently. Um, uh, I think it's two parts to two responses to that. First is, if I have different information, then obviously the decision probably would have been different. The second is um, as a kid, I used to play a lot of games, and then I was always fascinated by those strategy, maybe world building exercises. So it was almost like, the game where you open different doors and then maybe it leads to a different path kind of thing. I think I find that maybe a bit interesting. So if I could go back and say that, oh, I opened this door, I wonder if I open that door, where would have that taken me? So I think the other thing I didn't mention, maybe it has come through, is curiosity. And for me, curiosity would lead me to probably open other doors just to see where that might have led.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as you were talking about the activity you did as a kid, and that makes a lot of sense actually.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to now jump to, and I think what you just said also can be a different and a much longer conversation also.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can get around to that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But my last question for you for this podcast would be, you know, and last year you also kind of joined Path Builder as a co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about uh, why you decided to do that, or basically what is it that resonates most with you, and what do you want to do in terms of how you see Path Builder going forward?
Sure. So I think when Amit pitched this idea and was thinking about other young people and getting more young people and people interested in either working in the impact space or being driven to build maybe more purposeful um, things that they want to do. So in their lives, I think that um, sort of resonated. But also, like in the fellowship, I got exposed to young people and students, and sort of seeing how they would work. And postly, when I managed the same fellowship, we were looking at young leaders to work in the civic engagement and what maybe now we could call purpose driven. So there's been that thread. And if looking at climate change and looking at impact related things, I think because someone said, I read somewhere, there's no planet B, right? So you need more purpose people that are probably thinking of driving and building. So if we can get people and we can motivate them and show them, say, hey, this is what we've done, then I think that was the key driver. And these podcasts and other webinars and what we will be doing hopefully next year are ways to shed more light into maybe getting more and more people to feel that they are leading a purposeful career or are working in the impact space because they are excited by it and
Yeah, I
they
think
want to help solve challenges.
yeah, I think we can use as many hands on deck to solve all the
Yeah,
problems
that's very
that
true.